for committing murder. This man spent a full 10 years in prison. However, upon his release a decade later, strange signs began to surface, hinting that there may have been another culprit behind the crime. One fateful night, 10 years ago, two girls mysteriously disappeared from the village. After their families filed a report, the police quickly arrived at the scene. The scene, a warehouse. It was also the last known location where the girls had contacted their families. Now, blood was everywhere inside the warehouse. From the amount of blood, the police suspected that the two girls had likely been killed. Outside the warehouse, a blood-stained car was found parked nearby. After further investigation, the driver of the car that day was identified as a high school student named Young-woo. The police swiftly surrounded Young-woo's home and arrested him while he was still asleep. But regarding the events of that fateful night, Young-woo claimed to have no memory. The only thing he could remember was what had happened during the day. Yesterday, he had just finished his university entrance exams. To comfort a friend who had performed poorly, Young-woo invited some friends over for drinks and dinner at his place. Before the dinner, he had made plans with a female classmate to go grocery shopping together. But at the time, when he called her to set up a meeting, he saw her decline the call right in front of him. Feeling uneasy, Young-woo decided to go to her house. What he found were high heels scattered everywhere, and clothes with the tags still on them. He returned to his car, only to face a jealous friend who had come along with him. She angrily accused Young-woo's crush of being nothing more than trouble. Fed up, Young-woo snapped and kicked her out of the car. Before she left, she cursed at the classmate who had stood Young-woo up. This made Young-woo even angrier, so he canceled the dinner plans with everyone. That night, he drank alone at home. Now, in front of the police, Young-woo insisted that, due to his heavy drinking, he had no memory of what happened that night. However, the police were convinced that Young-woo had killed the two girls. They even called in several of his classmates as witnesses. The classmates recalled that the last time they saw Young-woo, he was in a bad mood. Apparently, he had argued with Bo Young in the car. One female classmate testified that she had visited Young-woo's house before the incident. At that time, he was drinking heavily by himself. Another villager testified that they saw Young-woo driving toward the warehouse. All of the witness statements made the police even more convinced of Young-woo's guilt. Not long after, at Young-woo's house, the police discovered a pair of shoes covered in blood and mud. This led them to conclude that Young-woo had been at the warehouse during the crime. They believed Young-woo's claim of memory loss was just an attempt to cover up and avoid responsibility for the crime. After days of intense interrogation by the police, a worn-out Young-woo eventually confessed to the crime in a daze. Once he was placed in detention, his mother came to visit him. But faced with the possibility that her son had committed murder, his mother seemed completely disheartened. She didn't offer any words of comfort. Instead, she coldly turned and left. After that, Young-woo was taken to the warehouse, where he was asked to reenact the crime according to police instructions. In the crowd, the father of one of the victims rushed out, demanding justice from Young-woo. But Young-woo, feeling wronged, shouted that he didn't kill anyone. However, at this point, no amount of protest seemed to matter anymore. Soon after, the court delivered its verdict. At just 19, Young-woo was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Life in prison wasn't easy for him. He was frequently bullied by the older inmates. At one point, in his despair, he even considered taking his own life. Whenever he was alone, Young-woo would often think back to that drunken night, trying to recall any small detail that could be a clue. But his memory always remained a blank. While he was in prison, his father, who believed his son was innocent, passed away, heartbroken. For the entire 10 years, his mother never once visited him in prison. Throughout those 10 years, the only person who occasionally visited him was a female classmate. She was cheerful and optimistic. She would share stories about the outside world and her life with Young-woo. Perhaps it was her encouragement that helped Young-woo endure all the pain and hardship. And just like that, 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. The day finally came for Young-woo's release. The classmate who had visited him, Na Chan, had by now become a famous star. On this day, she hurriedly wrapped up a chute and rushed to the prison to welcome Young-woo as he walked out, finally free. After being released, Young-woo first went to the river to pay his respects to his late father. Thinking about the warmth he could never regain with his father, Young-woo couldn't help but tear up. Na Chan noticed that Young-woo was carrying a book about criminal psychology. It seemed like he still hadn't let go of the case from all those years ago. After the tribute to his father, Young-woo decided to go see his mother, even though she had abandoned him long ago. On the way, Young-woo's car was rear-ended by another vehicle. He found out that the driver was a police officer. Young-woo refused to let it go and demanded the officer's contact information. He insisted on settling the matter with the insurance company later. This hot-tempered officer, Detective Liu, was known for his skills, but often let his temper get the best of him, even hitting suspects. Just recently, he'd been demoted to lead the local precinct's second investigation unit. Meanwhile, Young-woo returned to his hometown village. Na Chan didn't quite understand why Young-woo was so determined to return. In her eyes, he should forget the past and start a new life in a different city. But Young-woo shook his head. He felt he needed to see his mother again and visit the place that had changed his life forever, to figure out what path he should take next. His mother now ran a small restaurant in the village. 10 years had passed, and it seemed like the bustling days of the restaurant were still fresh in his memory. Back then, Young-woo had been accepted into the country's best medical school. His mother had been so proud that she threw a banquet for the entire village. The tables were set at the restaurant. At that time, it was the first time Young-woo had met Na Chan. But now, the restaurant's business was bleak. The father of one of the victims would often come to eat there, but in reality, he was just looking for trouble. This time, Young-woo saw his mother pushed to the ground by the victim's father. He rushed over to help his mother up, but the father grabbed him by the collar, demanding answers. He angrily demanded to know where Young-woo had hidden his daughter. It's been 10 years. The bodies of those two girls still haven't been found. Faced with the fury of the victim's family, Young-woo's mother chose to push him out of the restaurant. After 10 long years, she still believed her son was guilty of murder. She felt that even though he was released from prison, he could never repay for his crime. Hearing his mother's harsh words, Young-woo was left lost and confused. That night, Young-woo wandered alone through the familiar streets of his hometown. On the way, he bumped into an old classmate nicknamed Fatty. Seeing Young-woo after 10 years, Fatty was visibly excited. He couldn't stop talking about what had happened to him over the past decade. Young-woo interrupted him, asking why Fatty hadn't visited him even once during those 10 years. Fatty, full of excuses, said he had been too busy. He claimed his schedule was just packed. Yet, he still insisted on having Young-woo treat him to dinner. On the road, Young-woo encountered a group of thugs. They were about to throw bricks at Detective Liu, who stood not far away. Young-woo quickly grabbed one of the thugs. In the chaos, the police who had been lying in wait suddenly appeared and arrested the group. One of the officers recognized Young-woo. It turned out that they had been high school classmates. After a brief exchange, the officer suggested that Young-woo meet with the chief. The police chief also lived in the village. He was a close uncle of Young-woo. 10 years ago, it was the chief who had arrested Young-woo doing his duty. Now, the chief handed Young-woo a business card from a company director. He said he had already made arrangements. He advised Young-woo to take his mother and start fresh in Seoul. After taking the card, Young-woo reflected on everything that had happened that night. He felt a mix of emotions. Maybe Na Chan was right. He should leave this village, this place of sorrow. Before leaving, Young-woo returned home. He finally had a formal meeting with his mother. When they were alone, his mother seemed to soften, letting go of her coldness. She told Young-woo to go out and start a new life. She said no matter what happens, don't come back. She planned to stay in the village, to bear the judgment and pay for her son's crimes. The next day, Young-woo packed his things and sent a message to Na Chan. He had made up his mind to go to Seoul. At that moment, The chief's son, Ziwu, came to visit. He gave Young-woo a painting he had drawn himself. Young-woo unrolled it. To his surprise, the painting depicted the warehouse where the murders had taken place 10 years ago. Meanwhile, Young-woo's mother, while out shopping, suddenly fell to her death. It seemed the case from 10 years ago still held dark, untold secrets. This episode ends here.